Deborah, Judge and Prophet. This is a story about Israel repenting and suffered by enduring 20 years of Canaanite rule. Deborah, the judge and prophetess, lived during the 12th century B.C. She was a person of moral authority, was regarded as inspired by the Lord, was therefore accepted in the settlement of dispute. This is a chart of the major judges in Israel. Dates are unable to be confirmed for Deborah and Barak because there are so many different views on when she lived. She was known to sit under a tree between Bethel and Ramon, north of Jerusalem. Israel came up to her for judgment. When Ehud was dead, prior judge, the children of Israel again did evil in the sight of the Lord. Verse 1. The land had rested for 80 years, the longest period of peace recorded in the book of Judges. Israel enjoyed peace, plenty, and prosperity, and then just forgot God again. Then what followed was idolatry, worshiping Baalism, and the gods of the nations about them. After Ehud dies, the Canaanite king Jabin of Hazor defeated Israel with his 900 iron chariots and rules for 20 years. His commander, the general Sisera, Judges 4, verse 2. So the Lord sold them into the hands of Jabin, king of Canaan, who reigned at Hazor. Commander of his army was Sisera. The Lord allowed Israel to be in the hands of the Canaanites as punishment for their sin. Canaan was made up of a number of states, each ruled by a king. Jabin was the name or a royal title of the king of Hazor. He was also called king of Canaan, which suggests that he was the head of a group of kings. Hazor was the primary stronghold, about 8.5 miles north of the Sea of Galilee. Sisera's base was located by a narrow gorge where the Kishon River enters the plain of Acres, about 10 miles northwest of Megiddo. This picture shows where they lived. Judges 4, verse 3. And the children of Israel cried out to the Lord, for Jabin had 900 chariots of iron, and for 20 years he has harshly oppressed the children of Israel. With his large army and 900 chariots of iron, with iron knives projecting from the axle of each side, Jabin was secured and controlled the land. From the text, you get the idea that Sisera, captain of Jabin's army, was the real power in the land. One chariot was found around 13 B.C. The other one was an iron chariot that could have knives from the axle with the two horses, if you look at it. Deborah said, not a shield or spear was seen among the 40,000 in Israel. Once again, Israel cried out to God not to forgive their sin, but to relieve their suffering. 20 years was a long time to wait for help. Judges 4, verse 4. Now Deborah, the prophetess, the wife of Barak, was judging Israel at that time. There is no information other than this about her husband. Deborah was given wisdom, instructed in divine knowledge by the Spirit, and accomplished to interpret the Lord's will. This is a picture of Nebraska state capitol, where Deborah is judging Israel. Deborah means bee. She called herself the mother in Israel. Deborah became the spirit of government and discharged all the special duties of a judge except that of a military leader. She seemed to have direct communication from God, either of knowledge or power or both. Judges 4:5. And she would sit under the palm tree of Deborah between Ramoth and Bethel in the mountains of Ephraim, and the children of Israel came up to her for judgment. For judgment, to have her advice or counsel in matters of difficulty, and to have problems between contending parties, hear and decide by her, so that she might be truly reckoned among the judges. She would sit in open air under the shadow or canopy of a palm tree. It is common to plant trees in the names of themselves and their friends. Deborah's court, located, was about 9 miles north of Jerusalem, under a palm tree between Ramoth, the high place, and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim. Judges 4, verse 6. Then she sent and called Barak, the son of Amnon, from Kadesh in Naphtali, and said to him, Has not the Lord God of Israel commanded, Go and deploy troops on that Mount Tabor? Take with you 10,000 men of the sons of Naphtali and the sons of Zebulun. Deborah appointed Barak to be the general of the armies on this occasion, which shows that she possessed the supreme power in the state. Barak's name signifies lightning, which is actually an appropriate name for a warrior. She sent and called Barak by the virtue of her official authority as judge. This was around 1250 B.C. We see where Barak lived at Kadesh on the map. We can locate Mount Tabor. We can locate the Kishon River. Mount Tabor rises to about 1,865 feet above the sea, and its broad top of nearly a mile circumference afford a strong position out of which of the Canaanite chariots, and from which to launch an attack on the enemy below. If we look towards Mount Tabor, the land is flat and the fields are covered with many different flowers of many types. This flat land with flowers is where the Canaanite camp were set up for their tents and the war chariot. The soldiers were gathered at Mount Tabor. The battle would be fought along the river Kishon, which flows northwest into the Mediterranean south of Mount Tabor. Judges 4, verse 7. Against you I will deploy Sisera, the commander of Jabin's army, with his chariots and his multitude at the river Kishon, and I will deliver him into your hands. God revealed to Deborah that Barak was to assemble and help the Israelite army and draw Sisera's troops into a trap near Mount Tabor, and there the Lord would defeat them. Delivered him, not his person only, but his army and his 900 chariots. The brook or stream, River Kishon, is called from its winding course, is normally dry, but could swell very suddenly and dangerously to overflow its banks with heavy rains. Judges 4, verse 8. And Barak said to her, If you will go with me, then I will go. But if you will not go with me, I will not go. Barak was not a judge, but a military leader. He got his orders from Deborah. God appointed a spiritual leader in the land, Deborah. Paul put Barak among the heroes of faith in Hebrews 11, verse 32-33. Barak showed the high opinion he had of Deborah as a judge of Israel and the prophetess of the Lord, being desirous that he might have her with him, thinking it might help them to fight better. But why? To pray to God for him? To give him advice and counsel on any emergency? Being an oracle of God? Testify his regards to the Lord and to his presence? Might to be prevailed upon the people to go with him? He might fear that they would not believe him, or pay any regard to his words, be in dread of engaging the enemy unless she was present, which he supposed would satisfy them as to the mind of God in it, and mainly to give the army heart and spirit. Judges 4, verse 9. So she said, I will surely go with you, nevertheless there will be no glory for you in this journey you are taking, for the Lord will sell Sisera into the hands of a woman. Then Deborah rose and went with Barak to Kadesh. Deborah, or was it God that was somewhat upset with Barak about this time? This prophecy, what will happen, he probably didn't understand at the time. Normally, the general of an army receives glory. Barak will not. Judges 4, verse 10. And Barak called Zebulun and Naphtali to Kadesh. He went up with 10,000 men under his command, and Deborah went up with him. The Israel army was all foot soldiers, since they did not have a cavalry. According to Josephus, the enemy had 10,000 horses. Later, volunteers from the tribe of Benjamin, Ephraim, joined Deborah. Reuben, Dan, Gilead, and Asher refused to come. That's in Judges 5, verse 16 and 17. What Deborah and Barak did was an act of faith. They were dependent upon God's promise. Josephus said that the king's commander met them, pitched his tent not far from the enemy. The Israelites were so afraid at a large number of the enemies they were going to leave, but Deborah kept them there and commanded them to fight the enemy that very day. Judges 4, verse 11. Now Heber the Kenite had left the other Kenites, the descendants of Hobah, Moses' brother-in-law, and pitched his tent by the great tree near Kadesh. They were distant relatives of Moses. Judges 4, verse 12. They reported to Sisera that Barak had gone up to Mount Tabor. It was Heber and his family that first warned Canaanites general that the Israelites were going to rebel. The Canaanite army is defeated. Judges 4, verse 13. So Sisera gathered together all his chariots, 900 chariots of iron, and all the people who were with him, from Hershon to the river Kishon. Take a look and see where the Canaanite forces are on this map. The Canaanites depended on 900 chariots. The Israelites were dependent upon the Lord. Josephus said there were at least 3,000 chariots. The Canaanites probably had 300,000 foot soldiers, 10,000 horses, besides the iron chariots brought with them. The Canaanite general chose this area as the battlefield. Judges 4, verse 14. Then Deborah said to Barak, Up, for this is the day in which the Lord has delivered Sisera into your hands. Has not the Lord gone out before you? So Barak went down from Mount Tabor with 10,000 men following. Deborah, who was fully assured of it, and therefore it became Barak and his men, and great encouragement they had to follow, since as the Lord went before them, they might be sure of victory. Deborah told Barak precise time in which he was to make the attack. Josephus wrote, So the battle began, a great storm, vast quantity of rain and hail, And the wind blew in the face of the Canaanites so that they could not use their weapons, and to the backs of the Israelites. The Canaanites' 900 chariots are bogged down when heavy rains on the low-lying land. The Canaanites' 900 iron chariots are bogged down when the heavy rains fall on the low-lying land beneath the steep slopes. Mud, and they are swept away by the overflowing river Kishon. Verse 15. And the Lord routed Sisera and all his chariots and all his army with the edge of the sword before Barak. And Sisera alighted from his chariot and fled away on foot. The Lord and his angels were involved in the battle. Israel rushed down the slopes of Mount Tabor, boldly attacked the Canaanite camp, become sitting targets for the Israelite army charging down the mountainside, and won a glorious battle. His chariots would betray the rank of its rider and was caught in mud. His only chance of escape was on foot. The Lord set a fierce storm that would make Kishon River overflow and turn the battlefield into a sea of mud. We can read that in Judges 5, verse 20 through 22. In addition to the storm, they were thrown into panic and total confusion. Verse 20 through 21. From the heavens the stars fought. From their courses they fought against Sisera. The river Kishon swept them away. The age-old river, that river Kishon. March on, my soul, be strong. What helped to confuse and frighten the Canaanites was the sudden appearance of heavy rain during the traditional dry season, June through September. He would not have taken his chariots to the fields if there was any hint of bad weather. When you remember that to them, Baal was a god of storms, and you can imagine how this impacted the superstitious Canaanites. Josephus says there were heavy rains and hail, and the wind blew the rain in their faces, which so blinded their eyes that their slings and arrows were of no use to them, and they that bore armor were so confused that they could not hold onto their sword. Verse 16. And Barak pursued the chariots and the army as far as his hometown. All the army of Sisera fell by the edge of the sword. Not a man was left. No one escaped except Sisera. Reported that 997,000 of his army was slain. The main body of the army fled northward. Others were forced into the Kishon River and drowned. The commander of the Canaanites fled on foot across the plain. Verse 17. However, Sisera had fled away on foot to the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite. For there was peace between Jabin, king of Hazor, and the house of Heber the Kenite. Women had their tents apart from their husbands. Running for his life, he headed toward Kadesh, a city of refuge, but not for him. Probably on the way to Hazor, Jabin's stronghold. He might think himself safer in a tent than in a town, especially in the tent of women, where he might imagine no search would be made, for women of note in those times had separate tents. He managed to get near the oak on the border of Naphtali, that's Joshua 19, verse 33, about 6 miles east of Mount Tabor, in the site of the tents of Heber. Sisera knew that Heber and his family were friendly towards King Jabin and regarded it as safe. Verse 18, Joel went out to meet Sisera and said to him, Turn aside, my Lord, turn aside to me, do not fear. And when he had turned aside to her into the tent, she covered him with a blanket, either to hide him should any search be made for him, or it may be to keep him from catching cold, being in a sweat through his fight, and being also perhaps inclined to sleep through tiredness. Then he said to her, Please give me a little water to drink, for I am thirsty. So she opened a jug of milk, gave him a drink, and covered him. This is probably buttermilk. Sisera had no reason to suspect danger. She had shown hospitality and kindness to no pursuing Israelite soldier would force his way into the woman's tent. He was now confident that he had found a dependable ally and where he could rest in peace. Verse 20. Stand in the doorway of the tent, he told her. If someone comes by and asks you, Is anyone in here? Say no. He made the mistake of asking her to lie, for anyone asked for him. She then realized that the battle was lost. The grip of the Canaanites was broken, and he was on the run. Now, if she protected him, she would be in trouble with the Israelites, her own relatives. Anyone chasing him won't be satisfied until the captain was dead. Verse 21. Then Jael, Herbert's wife, took a tent peg and took a hammer in her hand and went softly to him and drove the peg into his temple. And it went down into the ground, for he was fast asleep, weary, so he died. In Eastern cultures, the women put up and took down the tents. She knew how to use a hammer with iron nail. What Sisera didn't know was that God had promised that a woman would take his life. So he died, not in the field of battle, but in a tent, not by a sword, but by a nail. not by the hand of a man, but of a woman. And Deborah foretold that prophesied. Verse 22. And then, as Barak pursued Sisera, Jael came out to meet him and said to him, Come, I show you the man whom you seek. And when he went into the tent, there lay Sisera dead with the peg in his tent. So Barak saw that a woman had the honor of victory, as Deborah prophesied. What impression this made on the victorious Barak is not said. It could not give him much pleasure, especially when he learned the circumstances of his death. This victory gained by a woman, as Deborah had foretold and prophesied. Verse 23. So on that day God subdued Jabin, king of Canaan, in the presence of the children of Israel. Verse 24. And the hand of the children of Israel grew stronger and stronger against Jabin, king of Canaan, until he had destroyed Jabin, king of Canaan. Josephus says that Barak went towards Hazor, and he met Jabin. He slew him and took his cities and destroyed the inhabitants of them, and was the commander of the Israelites for 40 years of rest. Let's take one more look at the battle between the Lord, Deborah, Barak, and Jabin, and Sisera. This is a Google Earth Pro Map aerial of the lay of the land around Mount Tabor. We see the location of Kishar River going through the flat land. We can see them where both Israel and Canaanites forces gathered before the battle. We see the map where Israel forces won the battle in victory. Then the area where Sisera was killed with a tent peg to his head. Judges 5, verse 1 through 31, Deborah and Barak rejoice and sang in victory. Israel will be at peace for almost 40 years. This grave of Deborah or Barak, but to guess, probably Barak, since he is from Kadesh.